Have you ever left a conversation just feeling completely energized, maybe even completely seen? Because the person you were talking to just gave you their total, undivided, almost magnetic attention.
Hmm.
Maybe it was, a new business contact or perhaps a date or even just some chance encounter on the street.
Right.
But for those, say, 10 minutes, you felt like the absolute center of their universe and you walked away thinking, wow, that person. They're just incredibly compelling.
Yeah, that connection.
Exactly, that feeling, that sense of being totally captivated. Well, we often just dismiss it, don't we? We say it's innate charisma or maybe just magic.
Or luck.
Or luck, right. But when you really start to look closely, especially at some of the source material we've been digging into, you realize it's often something else. It's actually a very carefully honed skill. It's strategic.
It really is. And what's fascinating here, I think, is that while so many people believe influence is just about, having the loudest voice or maybe the most logical argument.
Yeah, winning the debate.
Right. Winning the debate. But the deepest kind of influence, the kind that really lasts, it's fundamentally strategic. We're looking at a system here, really, a system for influence that's built on observation, restraint, and a kind of calculated empathy.
Calculated empathy, I like that. So the mission for this deep dive then is to understand the precise mechanics. How does charm actually work? How does influence operate? And we're going to use principles often associated with, let's face it, some pretty high-stakes strategic political thinking.
Specifically, Machiavellianism.
Exactly, Machiavellianism. But the goal here is to apply those, powerful tools ethically. We're diving deep into the art of intentional persuasion, but and this is important for you listening, we're insisting that you wield this knowledge with real integrity.
Absolutely. And maybe to set the table properly, we need to clarify what these powerful words actually mean, because they definitely carry some baggage.
They do.
Take seduction, for instance. Its origin, the Latin word seduce, it literally means to lead astray or maybe to draw aside.
Lead astray. That sounds a bit negative already.
Well, it highlights the power, doesn't it? The immense persuasive power we're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the capacity to actually change someone's direction, maybe their viewpoint, perhaps even their loyalties. It's the power to divert their attention, from their established path onto a path that you suggest.
Okay. And then there's the term that really makes everyone pause, Machiavellianism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in common use, that word is pretty much a synonym for ruthlessness, right? Cynicism, calculating coldness.
Mm-hmm.
When we hear it, we think of, hidden daggers and just pure self-serving ambition.
Exactly. And, modern psychology does back up that popular image, at least somewhat. Psychologists today often categorize Machiavellianism as part of the dark triad of personality traits.
Right, alongside narcissism and psychopathy.
Precisely. And they describe it as, quote, a cynical, manipulative approach to social interaction. It's deeply associated with things like emotional detachment and, crucially, hiding one's true, often self-serving motives behind a very appealing public persona.
Okay, so why on earth are we trying to link this seemingly toxic trait to ethical influence? That feels like a contradiction.
Well, because the underlying insight of Machiavelli isn't inherently evil. It's just, it's brutally realistic about human nature.
Okay.
And we can extract that strategic insight, that realism, and use it as, maybe we can call it read the room intelligence.
Read the room intelligence. I like that.
Yeah, it's about anticipating the deeply felt needs, maybe the vulnerabilities of the other person, what Machiavelli himself called virtue, and then quite intentionally positioning yourself as the necessary, maybe even the beneficial answer to those desires.
Oh, wait, let's pause on virtue for a second, because that term, it often just gets translated as virtue, right? Like moral goodness.
Yeah.
But Machiavelli, he used it in a much more specific, almost aggressive sense, didn't he?
He absolutely did, yeah. When Machiavelli talked about the ideal prince, virtue wasn't about being morally good in our sense. It meant strategic capability. It meant force, decisiveness, cunning.
So effectiveness, really. Effectiveness, exactly. The ability to seize the moment, to deploy strategy effectively. So in our context for personal influence, we're kind of reframing virtue, not as manipulation, but as the strategic competence required to first identify someone's unmet need, and second, to have the force of character, the competence to actually deliver the solution or the validation they crave. It's strategy, but leveraged for connection.
Okay, so let's really unpack this foundation. Before we even get to the specific charm tactics, we kind of have to grapple with that cynical baseline you mentioned, the one that underpins Machiavelli's most famous political advice. Because it seems like that uncomfortable truth is what drives these persuasive methods.
It is. Machiavelli, particularly when he was writing The Prince, he was essentially writing a survival guide for a very dangerous political world.
Right. Renaissance Italy wasn't exactly stable.
Not at all. And he was brutally honest. He had a very, very low opinion of humanity based on his observations. His core belief was that people are fundamentally, and this is his quote, ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers.
Yeah. He asserted that they would always abandon you when it was convenient or when they believed they could benefit from your failure.
That's a pretty grim assessment. It basically forces you to operate from a position of almost profound distrust, assuming that all loyalties are just transactional.
Temporary.
And that grim assessment, that fundamental distrust, led him straight to his famously cold advice for rulers. He wrote that it is, quote, much safer to be feared than loved.
The classic line.
The classic line. And the political logic behind it was simple. Love, he argued, is based on affection and gratitude. These are emotions, and people can sever emotions easily when their self-interest is threatened.
But fear.
Fear, however, is maintained by the constant threat of punishment. And that's something the ruler controls. It's a constant.
Okay, that's the political context. High stakes, life and death. But I have to push back a bit. If we translate that level of cynicism directly to personal relationships, doesn't that inherently make every interaction feel, I don't know, inauthentic? Calculating?
If I'm constantly sitting there analyzing someone's hidden fears, how can I possibly be genuinely connecting with them? Isn't that just manipulation?
And that right there is the critical ethical pivot point. The Machiavellian insight for personal influence used ethically isn't about fostering fear. Not at all. It's about recognizing that everyone, even the most powerful person, the most outwardly confident person you know, everyone has hidden vulnerabilities.
Okay.
They have deep-seated insecurities, fears they don't talk about, desires that maybe go unacknowledged, even by themselves. Now, the cynical Machiavellian, sure, they would leverage this purely for exploitation.
Right.
But the ethical influencer recognizes that influence is gained by proactively and subtly catering to these aspects to build profound trust, not exploit, build.
So, okay, instead of using that knowledge of human fragility to exploit them, the idea is you use it to build a stronger foundation, a more resilient connection.
Precisely. If we start with the assumption, as Machiavelli did, that people might be prone to betrayal when things get tough.
Which is a big assumption, but okay.
It is. But if we start there, then the influencer's task becomes clear. You need to provide such overwhelming value, emotional value, intellectual value, maybe professional value, that the cost of abandoning you becomes too high for them.
Ah, I see. So it's about making the connection indispensable.
Exactly. And that is the difference between cynical calculation and proactive trust building. We're taking the X-ray vision, the ability to see those underlying motives and needs, and we're choosing to apply it responsibly, ethically.
Okay, that reframes the core principle we can pull out here. It's not really about trickery then. It's more like a sophisticated needs assessment. Influence is earned by truly understanding what the other person secretly craves. Could be comfort, respect, maybe excitement, maybe validation for some hidden talent they have. You become influential because you position yourself as the solution to their unmet need. And this is key. You provide that solution consistently.
Right. Now that we've kind of established that strategic mindset, the willingness to observe, to understand those underlying motives, let's look at the actual practical tools. The Charmer's playbook, if you will.
Okay.
These are the specific, repeatable methods used to execute this kind of high-level influence.
And the fundamental strategy here, which I think often surprises people, is a complete reversal of the kind of ego-driven behavior we normally see, especially in social or professional settings.
Absolutely.
The goal is really simple, conceptually at least. Deflect all attention away from yourself and focus it entirely, 100%, on the person you wish to influence.
It's actually a profound act of personal restraint when you think about it. The person who is often perceived as the most charismatic is, counterintuitively, the person who speaks the least about their own accomplishments or their own concerns.
Interesting.
This is something Robert Greene describes really well in his writings on the charmer archetype. You absolutely must make the other person the star of the show.
So what's the psychological payoff for that restraint? I mean, why does fading into the background actually make you more memorable or influential?
Well, think about it. When you remove yourself as the subject of the conversation, you essentially eliminate any potential source of competition or defensiveness.
Ah, okay. No one-upmanship.
Exactly. People subconsciously start to think, wow, this person truly gets me. because you've created this safe space, a space where they can actually express their full narrative, their fears, their dreams, without being constantly interrupted by your equivalent story or your advice.
Yeah, we all know people who do that, the conversation hijackers.
Right. So instead, they relax, they open up, and crucially, they associate that feeling of ease, that feeling of importance, directly with your presence.
Okay, this leads us straight into the first major pillar of this playbook. And it sounds passive, but it's actually far more active than its name suggests. Active listening and validation. This isn't just, nodding along while you wait for your turn to talk.
No, not at all. This requires extreme discipline. You have to give your full, genuinely non-judgmental attention. And the key is listening more than you talk, and listening with the sole intent to understand, not the intent to reply or fix.
That's harder than it sounds.
It is. And it involves deliberate nonverbal techniques too. Things like maintaining comfortable eye contact, matching their energy level, not being overly enthusiastic if they're subdued, for instance, and critically reflecting their narrative back to them, validating it.
So give me an example. Instead of reacting to what they say with my own anecdote, like, oh yeah, something similar happened to me.
Right. Instead of that, you verbally confirm their emotional reality. So if they tell you about a setback at work, you don't immediately jump to offering advice. You might reflect their feeling back.
Yeah.
Wow, I can really hear the frustration in your voice about that. And I completely understand why that setback would worry you. You're validating the emotion.
You're naming the feeling you're hearing.
Exactly. And the psychological benefit of doing that is massive. Research consistently shows that when people feel truly heard, when their emotional state is actually acknowledged and validated, they feel significantly better about the conversation itself.
Okay.
And consequently, they view you, the listener, with this profoundly positive bias. You've instantly earned rapport. You've lowered their psychological guardrails. It's foundational.
Okay, so building on that rapport, that foundation of being heard, the next strategy is about achieving almost instant connection, but through nonverbal means. Subtle mirroring behavior. The core principle here feels ancient, almost biological. People just naturally tend to trust those who resemble them in some way.
Yes, the likeness principle. But the key here, and this is crucial, is subtlety. We are definitely not talking about mocking someone or doing some kind of exaggerated mimicry. That would backfire immediately.
Right, that would be creepy.
Exactly. This is about careful social calibration. The execution involves subtly matching their body language. If they lean in, maybe you lean in slightly. Matching their vocal tone, are they speaking softly or more assertively? And matching their speech pace.
So if they're very formal and measured, I should adopt a slightly more formal cadence myself.
Precisely. Or if they're more relaxed, perhaps they use mild slang or a bit of humor, you might subtly mirror that informality to signal, hey, I get you, I'm on your wavelength. It's essentially signaling non-verbally, I am one of your tribe.
Okay.
If you're speaking with someone who maybe makes a small, self-deprecating joke, you might respond with similar lightheartedness. It just bridges that social gap. Psychology really affirms this mechanism. Figures like Marty Nemko have pointed out, subtle mirroring can unconsciously make the other person feel more accepted, like you more, and therefore be more receptive to your ideas later on. It's like an unconscious nod of recognition between you.
This is fascinating, but I have to admit, it also raises a question of effort. I mean, these charmers seem to operate with this absolute commitment to maintaining comfort for the other person. Our sources suggest a really strict rule. They never whine, they never complain, they never criticize. Honestly, that sounds exhausting. How do you constantly operate like that without ever venting your own frustrations or shifting the attention, even briefly, to your own problems?
That is the next tactical element, maintaining comfort and avoiding conflict. And you hit on exactly why this is so difficult. It requires a significant suppression of one's own ego and one's immediate needs. The internal rule is harsh, yes, but it's incredibly effective. No one wants to hear about your problems.
Why not? Don't people bond over shared struggles sometimes?
Sometimes. But in this strategic context, sharing your problems immediately shifts the spotlight. The star of the show moves away from the target and onto you. And that breaks the spell.
So, okay, if someone asks me casually, how was your week? I shouldn't mention the minor disaster I just navigated. I should just give a pleasant, brief summary and immediately pivot back to asking about their interests.
That's the disciplined approach, yes.
Yeah.
And this principle extends even further into handling disagreement. A master charmer actively avoids friction. If the person says something you profoundly disagree with, The tactic isn't to argue or debate them.
So what do? Just nod.
You validate their perspective. You might say something like, okay, I can see why you'd feel that way, or that's an interesting way to look at it. You agree to understand their viewpoint, even if you completely disagree with the content. The goal is always to smooth out potential conflict and prevent the target from feeling defensive or, crucially, one-upped. Defensiveness is the poison that instantly breaks rapport.
Okay. The final piece of this playbook seems to be about becoming an advanced reader of microsignals, adapting to their mood. It sounds like you have to move beyond just listening to the words and start observing their entire presentation, their whole being.
Observation becomes absolutely paramount here. The charmer must notice the tiny, often fleeting nonverbal signals that can, as Green puts it, betray what words might conceal.
Like what specifically?
Like a subtle sigh that might suggest weariness or frustration, or a sudden blush that could indicate nervousness or maybe embarrassment, or even a quick, genuine smile that flashes across their face when a certain topic comes up that tells you it lights them up.
So a good influencer is basically running real-time, high-level emotional analytics on the person they're talking to.
In a way, yes. They are constantly scanning and adjusting. If the target lights up when talking about, say, a specific hobby or a former mentor they admired, you immediately steer the conversation further in that direction. You make them feel doubly good about the topic, and good that you notice their passion.
And conversely,
if they suddenly look troubled or maybe nervous, you immediately adjust your pace and tone. You become more soothing, maybe slow down your speech slightly. You are mirroring not just their posture, but their current emotional state. You're confirming, non-verbally, that you are sensitively attuned to their inner experience right now.
and this taps directly into that deep-seated narcissism that Robert Greene observed, right? That people are just inherently drawn to those who seem similar to themselves, and especially to those who seem to intuitively understand their internal state.
Exactly. By mirroring their mood, you signal this profound immediate empathy. It activates their primal instinct to bond. They feel understood on a level that goes beyond words.
Okay, now we have to move into what feels like arguably the most potent and maybe the most ethically challenging tool in this entire playbook.
Oh.
The lever of insecurity, using targeted praise and flattery.
Yes, and this is absolutely where we need to emphasize extreme caution and integrity. Flattery is undeniably a powerful tool. Psychologists are very clear on this, warning that, quote, praise has its dark side, precisely because it can be used purely for manipulation.
But sincere praise, presumably, is okay.
Oh, absolutely. Sincere praise is effective precisely because it temporarily lowers the other person's guard. It opens the door for influence. When you notice something real, something unique about them, maybe, I really admire the passion you bring to maintaining that historical archive, and you state it clearly, without gushing.
Yeah.
You establish yourself as an honest, appreciative observer. That builds warmth.
But the truly Machiavellian aspect, the part that really drives this high-level influence we're talking about, is when you focus that flattery not on their obvious strengths, the things everyone compliments them on, but on their hidden worries, their insecurities.
Precisely. That is the strategic core. The most effective flattery, the kind that creates deep loyalty, targets qualities the person is already insecure about. Maybe they're incredibly successful financially, but secretly worry they aren't seen as intellectually deep.
Or maybe they're brilliant technically, but worry they lack social charm or leadership skills.
Exactly. When you praise their strength, precisely in the area where they secretly fear deficiency, your strategic insight on that project was truly brilliant, or you have such a natural warmth with people. You provide profound psychological relief. You make them feel deeply seen and needed in a way that generic compliments about their known strengths never, ever could.
Okay, but here is where the manipulation warning has to be blaring, right? Because people who genuinely have low self-esteem or significant deficiencies in certain areas, they desperately crave this kind of validation. They have an empty spot that's just aching to be filled.
And a cynical flatterer knows this. They are actively looking for those self-esteem holes, as you put it. Leon F. Seltzer talks about this, how exploiters understand exactly how to raise someone's confidence and reduce their uncertainty through these very carefully calibrated compliments. They essentially find the need that only they seem to have observed, and then they fill it.
And for the charmer, the psychological reward for delivering this targeted praise is just massive, isn't it? It creates this kind of invisible debt of gratitude.
It does.
The person feels so validated, so psychologically reinforced by your presence that they become incredibly loyal, or at least eager to please you in return just to ensure they keep that vital source of validation close by.
That's essentially the transaction, viewed cynically.
Hmm.
They feel good because of you, and they now associate that good feeling, that relief from their insecurity, directly with your presence. This is exactly why the ethical delivery is so absolutely paramount.
You can't fake it.
You cannot fake it well, not for long. You must avoid obvious fakeness. If the compliment feels overblown or completely unconnected to reality, suspicion of ulterior motives will arise almost immediately. And the entire structure of trust you've been building just collapses. Poof.
So, okay, if we're really aiming for ethical application here, how do we make flattery feel both sincere and strategic without it feeling transactional or creepy?
Well, first, you anchor it firmly in reality. It has to be based on something observable.
Yeah.
Second, you pair it with the active listening we talked about earlier. It can't just come out of the blue.
Give me an example.
Okay, let's say a team leader just finished a really grueling presentation, and maybe you notice they seemed a bit nervous beforehand. You don't just walk up afterwards and say, "Wow, you were brilliant." That's too generic.
Instead, you pair the flattery with your specific observation. I know you were under a lot of pressure going into that, but the way you maintained your composure and clarity, especially under that tough questioning, that was genuinely masterful. You're reinforcing their competence and their bravery, which often masks that hidden fear of failure or inadequacy. It feels specific, observed, and earned.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It connects the praise to an actual event or behavior.
Precisely.
Now, to really show how incredibly powerful this combination, this mix of high-level observation, restraint, and that targeted flattery can be, we absolutely need to look at a masterclass in strategic charm. Benjamin Disraeli's political relationship with Queen Victoria.
Yes. This historical example is just perfect, partly because it takes place at the absolute highest echelons of power, where conventional, clumsy flattery would fail instantly. It would be seen right through.
So set the scene for us. What is the situation? Okay, we're in the 1870s. Queen Victoria at this point was famously deeply entrenched in grief and rigid formality. Ever since Prince Albert's death years earlier, she was generally seen as grim, withdrawn, and frankly profoundly bored.
Not an easy audience.
Not at all. And the established social contract, the expectation for everyone at courtiers, politicians, including the new Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, was to maintain extreme formality, rigid protocol, and address her with this very cautious, distant respect.
But Disraeli saw an opportunity there, didn't he? A Machiavellian opportunity, perhaps.
He absolutely did. He saw immediately that everyone else was appealing only to the Queen's official position, her role as a formal monarch. But in doing so, they were completely ignoring her profound needs as a woman, as an isolated human being. He saw what had been denied her, what had been repressed for years.
Which was
affection, excitement, personalized praise, a sense of partnership, maybe even a little romance. He recognized that beneath the grim facade was her softer, feminine side and her deep, unfulfilled need for companionship and genuine appreciation. So he decided to appeal directly to those repressed desires, ignoring the stuffy court protocol.
Wow. So how exactly did he break the mold? That must have been absolutely shocking to the court establishment.
Oh, it was startling. He arrived for his first audience not as a stiff, anxious politician, but almost as a gallant prince, as one historian put it.
A gallant prince to Queen Victoria.
Yes. He famously, and completely against protocol, kneeled to kiss her hand, a gesture of old-world chivalry that had been utterly abandoned by then. And as he did it, he declared, "I plight my troth to the kindest of mistresses."
Kindest of mistresses. He wasn't talking about politics at all.
Not one bit. He was talking about personal fealty, injecting an element of romance and devotion. He essentially promised her that his entire mission as prime minister was to realize Victoria's dreams.
That is the ultimate demonstration of focusing completely on the target's internal landscape, isn't it? He didn't talk about his policies, his agenda. He talked about her dreams.
And his approach was consistently subtle, indirect, and intensely personal over the years. He absolutely played the long game, instead of sending dry political memorandums like his predecessors.
Which she probably hated reading.
Exactly. He wrote her informal, warm, often quite affectionate personal letters. He didn't just talk about state business. He talked about her beloved home at Balmoral, using vivid descriptions of the landscape, the weather, making her feel cherished and connected to her personal life, not just her official duties.
And he flattered her, presumably, by making her feel essential to the running of the country.
Absolutely essential. He consistently asked for her personal advice on state matters. He didn't just give her summaries after the fact. He treated her as a genuine co-strategist before decisions were made. This targeted flattery made her feel absolutely essential to the governance of the nation, boosting her political pride, which had likely withered during those long years of isolated grief.
And then came the ultimate spectacular ego boost, the one perfectly tailored to her imperial self-image.
Yes, the masterstroke, proposing the title Empress of India. This wasn't just some random political maneuver, it was the ultimate personalized gift. It directly linked Britain's vast, expanding imperial success directly to her personal prestige. It fulfilled her fantasy of being a truly global, powerful, almost mythical figure. He made her feel powerful, important, and above all, seen for who she wanted to be.
And the result of all this tailored seduction, this strategic charm,
Yeah.
it was historic, wasn't it? Victoria's reaction was immediate.
Immediate and profound. She became, by all accounts, intrigued and delighted. It was a sharp, sudden contrast to her decades-long state of gloom and withdrawal.
And politically?
Politically, she became his ardent, absolutely unwavering supporter. Disraeli achieved a degree of personal favor and influence with the monarch that no other prime minister, before or since, has ever really matched.
And the most telling quote, the one that really captures the essence of his technique, comes from Victoria herself, doesn't it? When she compared Disraeli to his great political rival, William Gladstone.
That's the one.
Yeah.
She famously told others that sitting next to Disraeli made her think she was the cleverest woman in England. Whereas sitting next to his rival, Gladstone, only made her feel impressed by him, by Gladstone's intellect.
Wow. That distinction is absolutely everything, isn't it? Disraeli deflected all the glory onto her. He elevated her ego, made her feel capable and brilliant in his presence. Gladstone, in contrast, made the classic mistake of trying to impress her with his own brilliance. He made it about him.
And Disraeli reaped the rewards. He earned her total loyalty, eventually gaining the title Earl of Beaconsfield from her. His entire approach perfectly synthesizes the strategy we've been discussing. He coupled rigorous observation and calculation with what seems to have been genuine respect for her position and her emotional state. He identified and targeted the emotional gaps in her life, the need for affection, excitement, validation, and in doing so, he secured her unshakable loyalty.
Okay, this historical triumph, though, it brings us back very sharply to the ethical checkpoint, the cautionary edge. These strategies are clearly incredibly effective, but if they rely, even partially, on identifying hidden weaknesses or insecurities, well, the line between charm and outright exploitation feels incredibly thin. Dangerously thin.
The danger is absolutely real, and we can't understate it. When this kind of high-level strategy crosses over into conscious manipulation, trust becomes incredibly fragile. And the consequences, if discovered, can be severe. We have to acknowledge the potential cost here. Exploiters use these very same methods to, as one source puts it, wrangle something out of you, something you probably wouldn't be willing to grant otherwise.
Right.
That action, deliberately taking advantage of an emotional debt you've created or playing on an insecurity you've identified purely for your own gain. That is the definition of exploitation.
And if that calculation is ever discovered, I mean, if your incredibly focused attention or your perfectly targeted compliments are suddenly suspected of being nothing more than calculated flattery to get something,
It's over.
the whole structure just collapses instantly, right? The trust you painstakingly built through all that active listening gets wiped out in a second, and it's often replaced by deep resentment.
Absolutely. Moreover, we need to be realistic. Science suggests that charm, even when successful initially, is often a hollow victory if there's no substance behind it. We have to stress that substance still matters immensely.
So charm opens the door, but it doesn't guarantee you get invited to stay.
Exactly. While active listening definitely builds rapport and opens that door, it doesn't automatically guarantee a change of mind on important issues. Nor does it secure genuine long-term influence. If you only succeed in making someone feel good in your presence without delivering actual content or value or competence to back it up, well, your influence is likely to be very temporary, superficial.
Which means that real, lasting influence still requires a strong anchor in reality. Neuroscience actually suggests that genuine connection, backed by strong personal stories or clear competence, sways opinions and creates lasting change much more effectively than mere charisma alone. The content you bring to the table, your actual competence, your integrity, your ideas, that has to ultimately back up the emotional connection you've skillfully built.
And this brings us directly back full circle to Machiavelli's original warning, which is just as relevant in personal relationships as it was in Renaissance politics. People can be ungrateful and fickle.
So don't assume the spell of charm lasts forever on its own.
Precisely. Once you've successfully charmed someone, you have to maintain that relationship. And you do that by continually providing value and, crucially, by following through on any expectations you've created.
And presumably the fastest way to turn a devoted admirer into a bitter enemy is through making empty promises.
Absolutely the fastest way.
Right.
If you used your charm to imply or outright promise, you'd solve their problem. Or maybe use your influence to help them professionally get them a job. And then you fail to follow through. That unfulfilled favor immediately sours everything. It turns the original gratitude, the feeling of being seen, into sharp resentment. You promised a solution, you raised their hopes, and when you fail to deliver, you betray the very trust you worked so hard to build.
So the long game of influence requires consistency, reliability.
Totally. Use charm as the opening strategy, yes.
Yeah.
But then you must anchor it firmly in your word, in your actions. Deliver on what you implicitly or explicitly promised. This is what turns short-term rapport into genuine, long-term allegiance and influence.
So, okay, before deploying any of these powerful tactics, the mirroring, the targeted flattery, the radical focus on the other person, the ethical litmus test you really need to apply seems simple but crucial.
Yep.
Ask yourself honestly, if I were on the receiving end of this, would I feel manipulated or trapped? Or would I feel genuinely helped, understood, and elevated? True, ethical influence always respects the other person's autonomy. It aims to elevate them, make them feel better about themselves, not just exploit their emotional needs for your personal gain.
That's a perfect summary of the ethical responsibility here. Okay, so let's try to synthesize these actionable steps for you, the listener. Taking this Machiavellian blueprint, but applying it responsibly.
Right, the ethical termers checklist.
Exactly. First, master the art of restraint. Focus entirely on the other person. Make them the undisputed star of the interaction. Listen far more than you talk. The goal is profound validation. Ideally, they should become, in a positive sense, psychologically drawn to the feeling of importance they only get when they are with you.
Okay. Second, mirror thoughtfully. Subtly, carefully match their body language, their speech patterns, their pace. This enhances trust through that nonverbal mimicry we discussed. It signals unconscious acceptance, that feeling of belonging.
Third, empathize deeply. Use true active listening to fully reflect their feelings back to them, validating their narrative, their emotional experience. This builds that deep rapport, it lowers defenses, and allows genuine influence based on trust to start taking root.
Fourth, deploy flattery strategically but never patronize. Target your compliments carefully, maybe towards those hidden worries or insecurities you sense, but always deliver them sincerely. Anchor them in specific, factual observations you've made, no generic stuff.
And finally, number 5, be patient and follow through. Remember, charm only opens the door. It's substance and integrity that keep that door open. Deliver on your word. Anchor your strategic competence, your virtue, in the positive sense, in reliable action. That's the key to long-term influence.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now, thinking about your next interaction, whether it's professional or personal? Well, being truly seductive, in this broader sense of influence, it seems to be fundamentally about understanding human nature as Machiavelli did. Every single relationship, every interaction has a power dynamic, whether we like it or not. Now that you understand some of the mechanics of influence, the necessity of identifying unfulfilled needs, the power of providing validation, the choice you face is critical.
It is.
Are you going to use this understanding to exploit that dynamic for your own ends? Or are you going to use it to elevate the other person, to build a stronger connection?
And Disraeli, I think, modeled that ethical choice even within a pragmatic, often ruthless political world.
Yeah.
Yes, he charmed the queen strategically, but he arguably did so by boosting her ego, by giving her the validation and excitement that had been repressed for so long. His methods were certainly strategic, calculated even, but his end goal seems to have been forging a powerful, functional partnership built on mutual respect and, importantly, mutual psychological fulfillment.
So, perhaps the final thought is this. Use these Machiavellian lessons not as a cynical method of control, but as steps in a delicate, compelling dance of connection. A dance where both partners feel valued. Go forth and explore this concept of influence, but do it with deep integrity. And just watch how quickly people open up, how much more connected they feel when they realize you've genuinely made them the most important person in the room.